As organic analog beings, we become digitally mastered by the will of our own electrical impulses, fueled by the desire to experience one great life, discovering our own unique abilities. We live these lives through the enjoyment of adventure, romance, action, comedy, drama, fiction, or nonfiction, not by group appearance. Ruled by ourselves as individuals, we learn by making our own choices, and we are responsible for our own. Creative theatrical expression and imagination invigorates us, allowing us to escape from everyday norms, from the ridiculous reality we find ourselves constantly being engulfed by. Through this universe, by our own design, we become whatever we want to be.
If we do this, how do we know it's going to end any differently than it did before?
Because before you didn't have me.
Last night, we saw Pet Sematary last night. What a treat this was. What a treat this movie was. I feel like I personally may have a slightly unique perspective just because I went to go see the 1989 film first. Like I watched that literally minutes before. I had just barely finished it again.
It was really enjoyable for me. It was scary. It kept me on edge. There was lots of unexpected twists and turns in the story that departed from the original quite a bit. So yeah, it was a really good experience for me as well.
We were both really surprised at some of the twists and turns that this I had just barely stumbled upon this documentary as well. If you haven't seen the original 1989 adaptation to Stephen King's thrilling novel, I highly recommend watching that one right before you go out to see the 2019 reboot. How long had it been since you had seen it? How long has
Actually, just a matter of months. It's
okay.
Funny because
and it was kind of random, right?
It was random. Yeah, I didn't actually know that there was a new one coming out, and it had just been a long time since I had seen the original, and so watched it again recently and really enjoyed it. It was darker than I had remembered it being, and I feel like this new adaptation stays true to that.
Yeah, it really does. It really did.
Yeah, the Stephen King vibe, like it's not one of the typical slasher horror film. It's not campy like I'm kind of used to. It's much more like heavy, dark, approaching themes of, ideas of death, really getting into some heavy stuff. They say that he was afraid of this himself, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is a very dark story. And yeah,
it frightened himself. It frightened Stephen King when he wrote it. When he finished it, he said that he as soon as he finished it, he stuck it in a drawer and didn't think anybody would want it. And I think one of the biggest things that they discussed about it in this documentary was that it was he had read 3 books recently when he was coming up with the story, and all 3 books had the same trope of the destruction of the family, and that's what this film is about. It's about the destruction of a family, and perhaps the reunification of a family beyond the. Anyway, we're not going to get into that too much, but we're trying to stay clear of spoilers at first, and we're going to talk about how great this film was. Okay, so like I said, my situation was very unique because I had just recently watched that again. So I saw beat for beat the cemetery being spelled wrong, even the cemetery itself with all the wood and everything. I was so glad to see that all portrayed extremely well. The first act is almost exactly the same as the original 1980s film. As I sat in the theater, I was constantly being given a gift of wow and storytelling confirmation as each and every event unfolded on the screen, watching closely to see what would be changed. And not very many. There's just like small subtleties, but they really stayed close to the original film. I hadn't even watched any of the trailers at all, actually. That's one of the things that I hadn't. Had you watched any of the trailers?
I never do. So
that's actually really, really cool to know that. I had not watched any of the trailers on this, so I was completely surprised on everything. So anyway, this is just. It was a truly unique experience that I've had in a film, and I hadn't had a film experience like this for a long time. The continuous reinforcement of Ellie's involvement in the story is enhanced continuously. I always enjoy when the script tackles story points with vigor by explaining simple, potential controversial subjects like death and the afterlife to a child. Once again, like we were talking about before, this simplifies things This, in and of itself, like, simplifies things and unifies the audience to a degree. So the audience is unified, but we're still separated because everybody has a different idea, or maybe they have the same idea about what life is and what death is and what's beyond the grave, what life is for, why we're here, etc. So you have 3 different perspectives, the husband, the wife, and the daughter, all trying to figure out, because none of them know what it is, trying to figure out what's beyond the grave.
Yeah, and that was, for me, like, it set that tone from the beginning of this not really being a lighthearted film, but, like, they're, tackling these kind of metaphysical ideas from the get-go, and it's like, oh, okay. And then it becomes very macabre, right, because it's dealing with the death of these, well, I won't spoil anything, but, children die. They do in the original, and that was a big controversy back then. And with the book, obviously, starting with the book, it was controversial, and it is to a degree still today, right? So yeah, it definitely sets that tone of where you're just kind of it's dark throughout the whole thing, and it creates that terror.
But still enjoyable. We've discussed many times. Like, I'm not a big thrasher bloody guy. I don't mind blood and guts. I mean, I guess it's fine, and to a certain degree, Ash versus Evil Dead and all the Evil Dead films I enjoy for those reasons. But I'm not a huge. I don't like Saw or any of that stuff. But there's a reason this has more depth to it. So it's the family, it's the drama, it's those things, and it's all these other story points that bring us into it, and make
characters as well, right? Like, so it's exploring these characters, and it wants you to kind of have some connection to them, and I don't think it does the most extraordinary job of doing that in the most recent adaptation. In all honesty, I mean it's hard to do that. Like, the book obviously is able to help you connect to the characters a lot more. There's just not as much time to flesh out the characters and how they all interact with each other as much in film. But, for what it had, I think that it did a good job. But I feel like the original actually did a better job of connecting you to the characters. But yeah, like, it's not it's not a careless, like, whenever somebody dies, it's not like, oh, it's the first, like, people are going to die in a horror film. No, it's like, these are people that you've kind of explored some of these questions with. You've seen how they react to these situations, that they've fleshed out some character a little bit, so you're connected to them.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that they keep touting with this, from the original film and from the film, this brand new film, is that you are attached to them. You care about what they're going through because of this beyond the grave discussion that they have, that Lewis and Rachel Creed have. I say to a certain degree because Lewis and Rachel Creed were at odds on this subject, on the beyond the beyond the grave life, and what's beyond that. The Doctor truly believes that there is no afterlife, whereas Rachel believes things beyond. But like you were saying before, that she's terrified of it. She's terrified of the afterlife because of her own life choices, things that she had done in dealing with her sister.
Yeah, her trauma from her parents, like, leaving her at home with her sister who had spinal meningitis, who was severely disfigured. And I think that's a really interesting thing to mention, is just how both films kind of departed from the book, which didn't really explore Zelda's character all that much. But you get to see a terrifying vision of Zelda in both films, and in the latest one you see her kind of.
So Zelda has a much bigger part in the book.
Yeah, or no, in the films.
Is that what you're saying?
In the films, in fact. Yeah.
Okay.
She
okay.
was just kind of like, definitely.
So she has a tiny role in the book. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
so
Rachel,
they actually beefed her up.
Rachel's trauma is still related to Zelda's death.
Okay.
But it just doesn't explore, like, her disfigurement and, like, how ominous and terrifying of a creature she is, right? They portray her in both films as this terrifying monster. Who wants her sister to also have spinal meningitis as well? Like, she's a terrifying figure. Anyway, so I like that, actually, that they're really milking that she's really scary, and she's terrifying in the films, in both films, I think.
Yeah. She really was, like, they were equally terrifying, but in definitely different ways. I mean, and I think it was really interesting to see the comparison there between those two, especially. And I found it very interesting, particularly, especially when how that's in any normal story, that's really a side story that has kind of almost nothing to do with what's going on, but somehow they were able to kind of intertwine it and make it something extremely relevant.
Well, they did that better in this new
one, yeah,
for sure, because they kind of made it as if Zelda was like a manifestation of the cemetery in a way. Like it was haunting the house. Zelda was kind of haunting the house. Is kind of what I have. My experience was that Zelda seemed to like be pervasive, right? And like the lure of the cemetery is something that like both films also. Well, wait, the new film did a better job addressing like why Judd would take Lewis to the graveyard in the first place is because it has this allure to it, and they explore that in this new film. But they didn't do it so well in the original, right? But you kind of see like the graveyard having an impact on the whole family from a distance, kind of through the haunting of Zelda to a degree. Is kind of my interpretation of that.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just so weird how she was kind of a disconnected story, a story that had happened in Rachel's life so long ago, and now she's kind of resurfacing in here. It's like the power, the supernatural power, the demon that was in the burial ground or whatever was kind of bringing those things to life or whatever. So and like we discussed before, I really love how actually there was a lot more necessity to their approach in the desire, the lust to bring someone to the burial ground, like it's calling to me type of thing. So they, like in the original film, they didn't do that. That wasn't delivered as well. That wasn't set up as well. I feel like this one, it was definitely much more set up.
It was addressed at all, period. It didn't in the original film. And this one, Judd mentions that it has an enticing lure to it. I don't remember the exact words he uses, but
sometimes dad is better.
Yeah, so it lured him to itself to bury the dead. So yeah, it does a good job of that in the most recent one.
Yeah, like, oh geez, it was like but as I said before, it was a constant gift being given. I promise you, if you do yourself a favor, go see the original 1989 right before you go see Pet Sematary. I guarantee you will have a unique cinematic experience. I sure did, and it was one of the best movie going experiences I've had in a long time. Like and like I said, I'm not a big horror guy, but this was a unique experience.
There was some subtle like terrifying things. I mean, it was more just like creating the atmosphere that I noticed. I'm not sure if you did. Did you notice like at one point Lewis's thumb like is sticking out and it looks like Zelda. Like it looks like part of Zelda's body's all disfigured and like too big. And it just is like almost off
I didn't
camera.
notice that. Oh wow.
Yeah,
weird.
I was just staring at it like, oh my gosh, like just it was hard to. It wouldn't draw your attention to it at first, but then once you see it, you can't look away.
When was that? When do you know? Remember
I
when
don't
it was?
remember the exact
okay.
scene, but look for it. You know, it's something to look for in the film. Also, whenever what's her name, Ellie, right? Whenever she's getting out of the car at one point, she's walking away from it, and the door shuts itself.
Okay.
So there's little things like that are just like, if you notice, it's like, oh, that's spooky.
So anyway, like I really particularly loved the idea, the concept of the afterlife is something that's a big story. It's a big thing to be talking about, and having to explain that to a child was a big thing. It simplifies things, and unless. So I thought the burial ground on the original film was better. I thought it was cooler. It was this altar of sorts.
Yeah, who gives a shit? You know,
it was something that you would have seen in the X-Files. Like it was very like, holy in the original '89 film, it was like something like it was a big cylindrical or a circular area that was just bizarre and had all these kind of rock formations and stuff like that. That would have been you would have seen in the X-Files. That would have been kind of a creepy, interesting place. So,
well, yeah, I guess in the book, it was really depicted more as almost like an alternate dimension. Is like it was huge, like this huge area, and it was disorienting, and it was like they were stepping into another dimension.
And the demon had much more of a role in this. There was definitely small subtleties that were in there in this new one, but like there's that moment where they're looking away and it's like, oh, it's just a lemur or whatever, that's just a loon or something, it's an animal, but it was the it was the demon off in the distance or somewhere. But I would have liked to have seen the demon this time, since we didn't get much of Victor, because Victor played a huge role in the '89 film. He was the guardian angel kind of protagonist. You know what? He's the guardian angel guy who steps in and says, "Okay, you tried to help me, so I'm going to try to help you," type of thing. Yep. And that his character play had a much more significant role. I could have used a little bit more Victor, because actually he was my favorite character in the '89 film.
Well, he was the comedic relief, really, in the '89 original.
because he just appeared randomly. That's right. He kind of he's like, there's a scene where Rachel's on the plane and she's just like having to get back. Which that whole scene was so funny, because like she's taking several planes, but somehow it's all fits in the same spot. Yeah.
So that was nice to kind of have an element of that in the original, and not have you didn't have that at all really in this. He was very dark and scary the whole time.
But see, and I could have used more of that. Like, so we could have used more Victor.
One thing I think that the new film did better than the original is like the state of any reanimated character. So anybody that comes back from death, like in the original, they maintained the appearance of just like they'd never been in an accident. They were just more pale, like. Gage, whenever he came back, he just looked like a normal boy, if you recall, not like he'd just been hit by a truck.
Yeah.
But in this, and spoiler alert, first spoiler, if you're not wanting to have any spoils, then stop watching at this point forward. But Ellie dies in this one. It was a huge shock, and you see her come back, and half of her face is like drooping, and like it looks all macabre, and that's how it was in the book. And 1989 film, skipped that entirely. And I really like that it shows, they did with the cat, with Church in the original film, right? He was more mangy, but like you see Gage come back and he just looks like a pale little boy. So I did like that element of the new film as well.
Yeah. And not to mention also the cat. I thought the cat was much cooler. I mean, in this new one. I mean, of course, they probably some CGI, I'm not sure, but there's a moment, it's like you could tell that they just were like, okay, we just got to frighten the hell out of this cat every time they put the cat in the scene. So it's like, okay, it's just a really pissed off cat. But in this, there are moments where someone's getting eaten alive and the cat is licking its lips. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I laughed out loud. Like
that was actually some, and I felt funny because you and I were kind of laughing, but people in the theater
was laughing. Nobody else was laughing. But it was humorous. Yeah, it was a great take, great shot.
There were some great moments. Oh my gosh, this movie was a real treat. You and I were both smiling ear to ear from this movie. What a treat it was. Gage almost look exactly the same. Gage did.
That was tripping me out. I was thinking it's like a relative or something, like the Culkin family, like who is this kid? He's like, it looks exactly like him, which was really cool.
Okay, so
I liked also like, the trucks, like, obvious. So you're probably going to talk a little bit about how this is going back to Stephen King's life. But, this is the trucks going by so fast, and just like that being, kind of like a pop out. It's part of it's several scary moments where there's this truck going by extremely fast and extremely loud. For me, I always thought that was actually like a shout out to Maximum Overdrive. Did you ever see Maximum Overdrive?
Yes, and that's I just the first thing I thought of was when I hadn't watched this movie forever, so I forgot all about the trucks, and then I watched the '89 version. And yeah, it made me think of that movie, and then, but I also thought, okay, well, I just went right to, okay, Stephen King really likes diesel trucks a lot. Like, yeah, that's the first thing.
Some kids like trains, he was way into trucks, something like that. But yeah, no, I've come to find out, like this is, Pet Sematary is actually based very loosely on some real life events, or more just like places, right? The Pet Sematary is an actual place. Not the necessarily Indian burial ground aspect of it, but just like the actual Pet Sematary in Maine. And in that area, there were trucks that would go. Is it that area, or is it Stephen King's, like where he grew up, or what is it where there's trucks?
Well. What happened was so he lived in it was in Washington, and I can't remember the name of the city, or the town. It was a small town. It was just a place that was available, and they moved there to where he could write. And so it was him and his wife and his kids. And a lot of these experiences, a lot of these events in the film were things that happened to Stephen King. These were things that actually happened. The cat's based on a real cat that actually died, that actually got hit by a real truck that was going through that area. And the 89 Pet Cemetery, there is one of those fast semis going by in almost every single scene. Yeah. And so that's like a huge part of the story. I highly doubt that they had that many going through that town, but they probably had the same semi just loop him through the whole time just to make the film. But it was definitely a huge part of the story.
I was half expecting to see Emilio Estevez pop out, right? He was the star of Maximum Overdrive, so it's just like.
Did you like Maximum Overdrive? Did you like it?
It's been a terrible
forever.
film.
Okay,
but it's humorous in that it's like killer trucks, like
trying
to kill everybody. That's great. Emilio Estevez, right? So
Gage looked almost exactly the same. This had more weight. The end of the original was kind of silly, like Child's Play. So that's the other thing that I wanted to bring up. So like the end of the other one, the end of the original 89 flick was. It gets to be silly because it's a grown man against a tiny little 3-year-old kid in the original. So it's like it's not very, that part isn't very believable at that point. It's
but the actual ending though is, I mean, he kills Gage and then he buries Rachel,
right?
know, and then she comes back in the original film. She comes back and like kisses him
and
this morbid kiss, and you see like some pus come out of her mouth or her eye, I think, something like, it's gross. And then she lifts up the knife. She's gonna kill him, and that's like the last thing you see, which is great. Yeah. So in the book, he kills Gage and then buries Rachel. In the same fashion. Rachel comes back, and the last thing you hear is like, darling. That's the end of the book. She puts her hand on his shoulder and says, "Darling." So
okay.
It's the 89 film is kind of more true, I guess, to
the
original.
Right.
And this one completely departs and has a very interesting twist.
Yeah. To me, I was literally going, okay, so I'm watching Child's Play. And don't get me wrong, I don't hate Child's Play. It's hard to get scared of like this stupid little doll. Like, and I mean, there's there's charm to it because it's something original and weird and crazy. But anyway, Child's Play is fine. It's actually fun. I'm looking forward to Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill's doing the voice for the new Child's Play that's coming out this year. Anyway, so that'll be interesting to see. But the point that I was trying to get at, was simply this: that so in the first film, in the original 89 film, you have they're just fighting in the house, and it's this little kid, 3-year-old against an adult man. So it's like, okay, like how it's. Anyway, to me, this was epic and huge when he's fighting his 10-year-old daughter in the pet cemetery. They're fighting in the actual pet cemetery. Yeah. They're not on the burial ground, not in the house. They're actually in the actual pet cemetery. So that made it extremely epic and just huge at the end. And I love that.
Yeah, and I really like the idea of this whole family, being zombified.
Hold on. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I mean, this second half of the video is, once again, only for those of us who've seen the film.
Yeah.
So I really like that idea, especially since, they're more sentient than zombies, so they're more terrifying. And it's like that could totally set it up for some kind of sequel. I mean, obviously, Stephen King has written that book, but... the family goes on and starts taking over the town.
Dude, that would be so great. I mean, there is a Pet Cemetery too. I haven't seen it, and I'm sure it's probably not very good. I have no idea. I haven't seen it. But yeah, seeing the end of this film, it totally sets it up for a possible sequel. I hope this thing does well, and I hope we do get a sequel, because seeing them, the way the three of them just creeping in like that.
Gage and
oh my gosh,
terrifying.
That was really
so well done.
It was joyous, a joyous, terrifying moment in film. I just was so blown away. Stephen King is kind of like the Stan Lee of horror movies, because in the 80s that's what he was. That was in his contract. He had a cameo in every one of his films. In the 89 film, he was a priest. I don't think he was in this one though. I don't think so.
I didn't see him. He was.
It's possible that he was, but I didn't see him either. Wow, just what a treat.
So overall, what would you say? I mean, out of 10, what would you give it?
I give it an 8.8. And this is, I think it may only because of my unique, weird perspective that I got to go see. I saw the '89 film right before it. It's 8.5 out of 10, man. I think it's just such a great film, and it like apparently Rotten Tomatoes really ripped it to shreds.
Yeah, it's
but
like a 60 or something.
Yeah,
in there,
something
right?
like that. Yeah.
I'd give it an 8. Yeah, I'd give it an 8. I liked it actually more than the recreation of it, and I liked it a lot. I'd give it like a 7.5, 7.8, something like that.
Yeah.
But I did like to see a little bit more. I mean, it seemed overall like it had, more interesting, engaging themes, and like it was dark and heavy, brooding, and I kept thinking about it for days, after seeing it. So, yeah, it just has that feeling.
Yeah, so I liked it actually better than it too, and it was fun. It was fun. So I mean, hopefully we do get a sequel from this. So the things to also think about and to remember. Some really interesting things about all these really interesting story points. So the cat was real. The trucks, and that's something that I forgot to mention about the trucks when we were talking about the trucks real quick. The trucks themselves, that was something that Stephen King's son had gone towards the road, and that was a real experience. He actually, when he saved his kid from going to the road, the whole story flashed before his eyes. He said specifically that's what he thought of, and that brought up some huge story points.
He must really love his stories, because that was the thing that was flashing in his mind right as his son might have been hit by a semi, was like the whole story of Pet Sematary, in fact, is what he thought of as he was saving his son's life. That happened. That's shocking to me.
Yeah. And it was the only, apparently, according to Stephen King, this was the only one that's really frightened him. And it's one of those things and I think it's because he's a father. And so having to put himself in this situation where he has to replace his own children with, half demonic versions of themselves, crazy. I have to talk about his daughter. We have to talk about his daughter Ellie.
Oh yeah.
So my
impression of her, if I may, like from the beginning, her voice was like too light and airy. She seemed like she was forcing things, her lines and her demeanor, the way she was looking, everything just seemed unnatural, and she was kind of taking me out of the film, to be honest.
Really? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, but then immediately, like the switch, whenever she went into her, deadly role, that was what she was cast for. I'm convinced, is because she was
convincing,
so good in that, and that she couldn't play the kindly daughter, I think, as well. But as soon as she was killed and reanimated, she was excellent. She was terrifying.
Yeah, I feel like that. I know, I can see what you mean now that you mention it, and I do agree with you to a certain degree. However, they did build her relationship with her father quite a bit, and that's the beauty of this, is that there was. With a 10-year-old daughter, you have a lot more to work with than you have with a 3-year-old kid. You have the explanation of the beyond the grave, all these other things that are involved. So it actually made it better. It carried more weight. There's a hugeness to the story there, because they've actually had a conversation about death and what's beyond. And I think at some point she's like, "You were right, Daddy. There is a beyond, but it's not good," or something. I don't remember. She's something like that. But she was, she was, and she's like, "Right, Daddy?" And she's like, he's like, "You're not my daddy," type of thing, or I'm not your daddy," type of thing, or maybe that was Rachel, his wife, doing that. But anyway, that was particularly great. I think I agree with you. I think that the build of that made it twice as tragic. It's the same thing that we should have got with Anakin Skywalker turning into Darth Vader, where it becomes, you actually care about the person so much more. They're a huge part of the story. Someone you really care about that much more, and so when you see them become this other thing, that's when it's tragic, and that's when it rips your heart from your own soul, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, real character conflict,
Yeah.
Or just real connection to the characters.
Yeah. Yeah, deep connection and then just being torn away from it. So anyway, what did you guys think of it? Hopefully you did what I did. If you do what I do, if you do the thing that I asked you to do, then maybe you'll have the same awesome cinematic experience that I did.